Yuzo Koshiro, a name that will live forever in the annals of video game history. For 4 decades, he has been creating unforgettable experiences, with his music lifting the emotional intensity of so many video games into definitive memories that will live with us forever. Back in 1993, Electronic Games magazine said that Koshiro-san was acknowledged as perhaps the single most gifted composer currently working in the video game field. And whilst that was undoubtedly true, it does not do justice to what he has created and what he has achieved. While talent and gifts are undoubtedly important, 99% of what you feel when you experience the music of Yuzo Koshiro is due to good old-fashioned, unceasing hard work. And so, in order to adequately do his legacy justice, not only will we be checking out the music, we will be delving into the technology of the platforms the games were developed for, the sound hardware those systems had, and how Koshiro-san and his contemporaries went about realizing their music on that technology and in those games, so that we can truly appreciate and be moved by this work and this music in the most complete way possible. Episode 1 will cover the 1980s. So of course, please comment below with your insights and information that you think will enrich other viewers of this video. And even better, please share any memories and experiences you might have had with the games or the music that we might have talked about and how it has moved you in the past. The ultimate goal of this video, and perhaps any videos that succeed it, is simply the celebration of one of gaming's true icons. This is going to be a long one, so grab yourselves a drink, get comfortable, and welcome to the games of Yuzo Koshiro, Part 1, the 1980s. Yuzo Koshiro was born in Hino, Tokyo in 1967 to a very musical family. His mother was a concert pianist, and he began learning the piano at age 3. Supposedly, he showed exceptional ability and was soon playing the violin and the cello, and even dabbling with the guitar. His house was full of music, spanning a massive variety of genres. Thus, the young Koshiro-san was exposed to a huge variety of music from a very, very young age. By the time he was 8 years old, he was actually studying composition under the legendary Mamoru Fujisawa, otherwise known as Joe Hisaishi of Studio Ghibli fame. And after 3 years, Koshiro-san would continue his musical education independently. He became a huge fan of Yellow Magic Orchestra in his early teens, and this led him into the world of electronic sounds and instruments, the consequences of which we have been enjoying for decades. He would also delve into rock, jazz, fusion, classical, and everything in between. I've actually put together a YouTube playlist of Koshiro-san's influences for your enjoyment, and you'll find the link to that in the description below. Now, it was also around this same time that he began to frequent video game arcades, and his passion for video game music began to emerge. Games such as The Tower of Juraga, Space Harrier, and Gradius inspired him musically. Koshiro-san has shared that he would record the music from these games onto an audio cassette and then go home and transcribe that music onto his microcomputer. This was a painstaking process, going through, listening very carefully, and working out the notes of each part and writing them down as code to be played back by his computer. He also started creating his own tunes and his own jams, and some of them would even get published in magazines for people to recreate at home. And we will of course delve into how this was possible later on. And so it was that when he saw an advertisement from development studio Nihon Falcom for sound programmers and music composers, Yuzo Koshiro, with his chiptune demos in hand, applied for the job. He got it, and it was from here that the legend began. Now, so far as I'm concerned, we cannot even begin to truly contend with what Yuzo Koshiro et al. Were doing throughout this period without talking about the technology that they were working with. Even the most cutting-edge computers of the day existed within the bounds of what were the extraordinary technical constraints of the era, and this was perhaps true for nothing more than the music and sound. However, as has been and will forever be the case, these constraints drove the most extraordinary creativity as composers and developers sought out ingenious ways to overcome them. Software of the day was typically distributed on 5.25-inch floppy disks, each holding about 320 kilobytes of data per side. To put that into perspective, using the MP3 format, which wouldn't even be invented until the next decade, one might just about squeeze a single, heavily compressed song onto one side of such a disk, with virtually no room left for any other data. How then, with such rudimentary software tools and profound hardware limitations, were developers able to solve the problem of creating and integrating compelling sound and music in their games? The answer was programmable sound hardware. Computers and consoles of the day came with inbuilt synthesizers, chips that would generate electrical signals that could be manipulated in various ways to create musical sounds. That music would exist as code, which would then command that synthesizer to generate different permutations of those electrical signals in such a way that they would sound musical. Think of the code as a kind of musical score that would be read by the sound chip, and that sound chip would then perform it in real time as we were playing the game. But how did composers and programmers go about doing this? It was not like today, where we have beautiful software like Logic and Cubase with their wonderful graphical user interfaces and very intuitive layouts. In this case, back in the 80s, the music had to be programmed in on a note-by-note basis. And whilst I'm no expert, here is a basic overview. The music was programmed in something called Music Macro Language, or MML. Each studio, and in the case of Yuzo Koshiro, each composer, would build their own sound driver to interpret those MML commands and translate them into low-level assembly code commands that the sound chip could actually understand and be manipulated by. For example, if we wanted to program a basic C major scale, it might look like this. T would be the tempo value, O is the octave value, L might define the note length, and while the other letters are the notes. Now, the sound chip itself doesn't actually understand what any of these symbols mean. Instead, the sound driver translates them into those low-level assembly code instructions, and every driver would handle that translation a little differently. But let's keep it real, that musical example was extremely boring. As Koshiro-san and his contemporaries developed their sound drivers, they would begin implementing commands that would breathe extraordinary life and vitality into their music. On the most basic level, they could go to the effort of adjusting those values on a per-note basis. But from there, it would get really interesting as they would begin to add all kinds of musical punctuation and grammar, enabling profound emotional expression at a granular level, and perhaps create something that sounds like this. Now notice how complicated that code has got very, very quickly. Just take a moment and think about that. This is a tiny amount of code, barely a couple of bars of music for a single instrument. And even worse, there was no real-time feedback. It wasn't like when you typed out a letter C, you heard that note. No. Once the music was programmed, it had to be compiled and tested. Was there a problem? Guess what? Go back into the code, fix it, recompile it, test it again. Just try and imagine the discipline and the work ethic required to finish even a single piece in this way, let alone an entire soundtrack, and let alone an entire legacy. But there was an upside. Working in this way inevitably led to happy accidents. A mistaken command or stray entry might accidentally sound incredible and push the music in a direction the composer could never have dreamed of had they not been having to create it in this way. Understanding this is the first step to truly appreciating what Yuzo Koshiro achieved throughout this period, and understanding it will affect how it makes you feel when you experience it. Thus, the task of the video game composer was not simply to create compelling musical compositions and arrangements. It was to program them into the game in such a way that the music hardware could process it and express it in an emotionally compelling way. And it was his grasp of both of these aspects that turned Yuzo Koshiro into a generational master. For Koshiro-san, this journey began with NEC's cutting-edge Japanese microcomputer, the PC-8801. Now, this was, almost without question, the single most important hardware platform of Yuzo Koshiro's career. It was a high-end 8-bit home computer released in 1981 in Japan. Not initially designed or marketed as a gaming machine, it would nevertheless evolve into a major gaming platform across Japan throughout the decade, with multiple hardware revisions and improvements. The original 1981 model featured a 4 MHz Z80 CPU. It came with 64 kilobytes of memory, expandable up to a massive 576 kilobytes, and had several graphics modes. 640 by 200 resolution with 8 colors, or a sharper 640 by 400 resolution high definition mode, which only featured monochrome color. Early models of the 8801 featured the Yamaha YM2149F programmable sound generator. It was very rudimentary and featured 3 channels that could either generate a simple square wave tone or noise for percussion. Now, in its simplest possible sense, a channel is an independent lane of sound. With 3 channels, the chip could produce 3 notes at once. This is what we call 3-note polyphony. How did it do this? Well, each channel would output an electrical signal that ticked rapidly on and off at a rate set by dividing down the system's master clock. Those ticks on and off would then be sent to a speaker where they would become an audible pitch. Now, the pattern of voltage changes as it ticks on and off is what we call a waveform when represented visually on a graph. A square wave, for example, the voltage jumps instantly up, stays high for a moment, and then jumps instantly back down. Now, as the voltage shifts up and shifts down, it pulls the speaker cone in and out. And as these ticks speed up to many hundreds per second, you get the classic electronic tone that we all know and hopefully love. Now, these 3 channels of PSG synthesis had potential, but it meant that creating compelling music on this early PC-8801 was an exquisite balancing act. But, as indicated before, these profound constraints would drive creators to conjure up fascinating and intricate ways of exploiting the potential that was there. However, it was not long before NEC would begin to revise the PC-88 line. In 1983, they released the PC-8801 Mark II, which featured the same YM2149 as standard, but had the option of adding Yamaha's more powerful YM2203 chip alongside it. Now, the YM2203 was a massive upgrade. It gave composers 3 channels of FM, or frequency modulation synthesis. Now, whereas a single PSG channel generates a single wave, a single FM channel can generate up to 4 waves called operators, and then combine them into a single tone. The square wave is the visual representation of an amplitude that abruptly ticks on and ticks off, but FM operators generate sine waves. And as you can see, the amplitude gradually increases and decreases over time. And just as it looks, the sound is much smoother, more natural, more fluid because of this gradual oscillation. And as a result, it's also much more malleable. These sine wave operators can be manipulated in various ways. For example, by shaping their envelope, which controls how their volume changes over time. We'll go into more detail on envelopes a bit later. The operators can also be arranged in different ways, sometimes in a chain, where one modulates the next one, and sometimes in parallel. Now, depending on how they're arranged, they can affect each other in complex ways, one wave dragging or pushing another's shape to and fro. This kind of modulation allows for the creation of incredibly rich and harmonically complex tones. And if one were to spend enough time tweaking, it's possible to create a tone called a patch or an FM instrument that resembles a real-world sound. Or perhaps it just sounds freaking cool in its own right. Every great FM sound you hear in a video game soundtrack is, essentially, a piece of code that tells the FM chip exactly how each operator should generate its sine wave and how those operators should be arranged and modulated. And just check this demo out where it combines PSG and FM synthesis. You can literally see the additional harmonic complexity in the waveform of the FM channels compared to the square waves. But the key thing to understand is that the code was written, the drivers created, to manipulate these sound chips into generating various permutations of these electrical outputs in such a way that they sound musical and were emotionally compelling to experience. Now, having both of these chips on board meant the system was now capable of 6-note polyphony. However, the fact that the YM2203 was an optional upgrade limited the amount of time and effort that could be invested in creating and arranging for it, as it was by no means a given that users would even have one. But that all changed in 1985 with the release of the PC 8801 Mark II SR. Now, the YM2203 came as standard, and it was this model that Yuzo Koshiro began shipping games for. The very first game that Yuzo Koshiro is credited with is called Xanadu Scenario 2, which is a sequel to, you guessed it, Xanadu. Like the first game, it's a side-scrolling RPG where the player is out to defeat the king dragon Galsis. And whilst it is interesting with its real-time bump combat, which I've always been quite a big fan of, I did find it almost impossible to get any enjoyment out of what is an extraordinarily difficult game. But when it came to the music, for his first project, Koshiro-san shared the composition and programming duties with Takahito Abe. And like all the games that he worked on for this first batch, the music was created with the YM2203 in mind, meaning that the music could take advantage of the 3 channels of FM synthesis. And legend has it that Falcom even used some of Koshiro's demo tracks for this game as well, which is pretty cool. If we take the theme of Guen, we can hear something pretty beautiful, to be honest. Listen to that melody line with the volume that phases up and phases down as it progresses. Remember, to achieve this, Koshiro-san would be programming in a new volume value for each note within that string of code. I mean, the level of precision is simply sublime. Here are some other choice pieces that Yuzo Koshiro created for this game. Fortunately, Falcom has a music channel on YouTube, and they actually credit the tracks that they've uploaded to specific composers, so we can be relatively confident that it was Yuzo Koshiro that created these specific pieces. And it must be said that not all the music in this game is particularly remarkable or even that good in my opinion. Remember, thinking about the software tools we were working with, the hardware constraint, it really did take someone exceptional to make something of them. And if you compare the music that Yuzo Koshiro created for this to the stuff that Abe-san created, it becomes very clear that there was already quite a wide gulf between them at this point. And it is quite incredible to think that this was his first ever release, and it is clear that the seeds of greatness were already sprouting. His next assignment was composing the title theme to another side-scroller called Dragon Slayer Jr. Romancia, and god damn son. Off the muscle, we are already experiencing an order of magnitude leap in emotional intensity when compared to his music in Xanadu. But why is that? Is it the composition itself? In my opinion, no. It's the arrangement. Unlike the music we were listening to before, Koshiro-san is taking full advantage of all three channels of FM synthesis in the YM2203, but crucially, he's also integrating the PSG synthesis of the YM2149. And wow. Going back to his influences, I can't help but feel we are clearly drawing on the Alfie, the 80s Japanese rock band, as a primary influence here. I've linked the specific piece that I think had the greatest influence here in the playlist that's in the description. I mean, this track is just an absolute wonder, and we're already beginning to get a sense of just what a bad, bad dude he would turn out to be. I'm not the biggest RPG guy, but gosh darn, you just can't help loving Ys. Charged with the task of finding the 6 books of Ys, you play as a young swordsman named Adol, and are charged with using the knowledge in these books to destroy the evil that is sweeping the land. Again, one thing I just have to note that I really love about these games is that bump attack, but ultimately, Ys is an extraordinary embodiment of that quality that we all yearn for in a great RPG, adventure. And no adventure game is complete without a spell-binding soundtrack. And it is once again delivered by Yuzo Koshiro and Miyako Ishikawa. While still, in my humble opinion, a far cry away from what he would soon be creating, these two did really make something magical. The music here was primarily developed for the 2203, with quite a few of the tracks actually only using those 3 channels of FM synthesis. Other tracks did feature that richer polyphony. If I'm being brutally honest, I can't help but feeling, perhaps having been spoiled by what was to come, that this first Ys soundtrack never quite reaches the rich heights of what was to come later. It definitely has flashes of greatness, such as this next piece, which features 3 different time signatures, and this is already an emblematic example of the fascinating things that Yuzo Koshiro was doing with rhythm. Even more amazing when you consider how he was, again, having to create this music at the time. Check this out. to me, the wonder of ease is its primary importance in Koshiro-san's development and his story, something that he has explicitly noted about the ease games. Do you have a favourite track from this game? Be sure to hit up the comments with your favourite tracks and your favourite memories from playing this legendary RPG. It was at this point that Yuzo Koshiro would make a sharp right turn as he went to work on the MSX and MSX2 to create the music for Dragon Slayer 4 Drasle Family, known as Legacy of the Wizard outside of Japan. The MSX was released in 1983, with its punchier successor coming out in 85. The MX2 also had the legendary Z80 CPU, this time clocked at 3.5 MHz. It boasted 64 kilobytes of memory and an enhanced video display processor. But in terms of sound, it still lagged behind a bit, and it only came with the General Instrument AY38910, otherwise known as the Yamaha YM2149, the same chip found in the earlier PC8801. Interestingly, the MSX2 did eventually offer FM sound expansion cartridges that would dramatically increase the potential of its sound and its music output, but they were not widely used at the time Koshiro was working on the platform, hence why he would fall back to this very basic PSG synthesis. All the same, with exquisite arrangement and ingenious programming, he was still able to create magic on this platform. Interestingly, it does seem as though Koshiro-san programmed the music for the Famicom and NES versions of this game as well. Whilst conceding that his memory is fuzzy, he does recall coding the sound driver they used for those versions. And I'll be damned if those versions do not also sound amazing. And I might just even prefer it to the MSX version, but I'm not sure. What do you think? But afterwards, it was back to the PC8801, and my goodness me, it was at this point that things started to get serious. Sorcerian was the fifth installment in Falcom's Dragon Slayer series and was another side-scrolling RPG. Joining forces with the great Meiko Ishikawa once more and Hideo Nagata as co-composer and sound programmer, I don't know what they were eating for breakfast at the time, but god damn, the music for this game is on another level. The software tools were improving. Koshiro-san and his contemporaries' understanding and command of the synthesis technology at work was truly coming into its own. Taking the track Town Pentawa 1. We immediately feel those syncopated rhythms that he was beginning to integrate into his arrangements. But as great as that was, I honestly had to pinch myself when hearing this next track for the first time. Just listen to these unbelievable, exquisite, syncopated, contrapuntal lines weaving all over each other. No joke, that honestly sends shivers down my spine. The rhythmic quality is quite simply sublime. I'm not sure if you heard it, but there was actually a line that had a faux reverb or a delay effect on it, which is interesting, as this chip did not support such an effect. So in order to achieve it, Koshiro-san would have programmed that same note being repeated, but with the volume value of each successive note decreasing over time. He probably created this function in his driver, but it is amazing. Family, I need you to sit back and really consider what we are hearing here. This is already pure mastery at work. Listen to those beautiful FM instruments marrying up magnificently with the simple PSG square waves to create something so rich, so wonderful. When arranging for and conducting an orchestra, such great care is taken when expressing a certain part of the harmony with this instrument or that instrument, to have certain lines performed in this way or that. And honestly, at this level, programming video game music for this hardware was no less nuanced and no less delicate. Simply sublime. Sit back and enjoy. Look, if you haven't already done so, please just go and listen to this entire soundtrack. Even right now, as you are sat watching this video, there's a good chance that I am literally doing that at this very second. It is simply a god-tier video game soundtrack, and you really owe it to yourself to just go and experience it. But all in, we were just getting started. Now, it was at this time that Yuzo Koshiro began taking on freelance projects, in addition to his work as a Falcom employee. One such project was called Ojousama Club, and everything about this game is really, really weird. So far as I can understand it, it's essentially a card game where the goal is to play a lower card than the 5 CPU opponents, with the reward for victory being that a woman will remove an item of clothing with each hand you win. But as weird and inappropriate as that is, the music is weirder. I'm not sure what was going on here, but clearly this was a collaborative effort. Some of the music in this game is, I hate to say it, but it's pretty horrendous. And by horrendous, I just mean low effort. So I know that a lot of the music in this game was not created by him, but it does end up being an emblematic example of how important the artist and the developer was in affecting how you felt about the capabilities of a particular piece of hardware. If we listen to some of the non-Koshiro music in this game, we get this. You don't need to know anything about music. You can just feel how lifeless and stock this is. The giveaway that it was not created by our man in Japan was that most of the music has absolutely no velocity or rhythmic variation. We'll now compare it to one of the tracks that I suspect Koshiro-san did create, although obviously I can't actually find that information anywhere for certain. just feel that sound chip coming to life? Now, of course, like I said, I can't say for certain, but these are the tracks that I really do suspect were created by Yuzo Koshiro. And once again, it really goes to show how critical the programming and arrangement was in making emotionally captivating music. Either way, the sooner we move on from this game, the better. Koshiro-san would also, in his capacity as a freelancer, create the music for 2 action RPGs on the Sharp X1. The X1 also featured only 3 channels of PSG synthesis comparable to the MSX and the earlier PC 8801 models, making the music, once again, comparable to those systems. Let's take a listen to what he created. After finishing those games, it was back to the PC 88, as Yuzo Koshiro and his fellow composers would return for Ys 2. Again, primarily focusing on the YM2203, but unlike the first game, this soundtrack really did take full advantage of the PSG capabilities of the 2149 as well. To me, in a relatively short space of time, it really does seem as though the team advanced their grasp of the tools at their disposal significantly. Like I said, I really did like the music in Ys a lot, but it didn't quite fill me up in the way that some of this other music we've listened to so far did. But I'll be damned if Ys 2 did not shoot for the moon. Take a listen to this. The thing that really sticks out to me immediately is the richness of those FM instruments. It really is a cut above. Whilst listening to this soundtrack, it did become very, very easy for me to tell when a Yuzo Koshiro track was playing. And the reason was that Koshiro-san invariably came up with fascinating and captivating rhythmic lines. You see, as we went over earlier, composing the music was only a fraction of the workload, and honestly, it played a relatively small part, believe it or not, in determining how the music would end up sounding and how it would make us feel. I've always thought the line between composition and arrangement is very blurred. Like, when does what you're doing cease to be composing and begin being arranging? It's very difficult to draw a very distinct line there, in my opinion. But creating this kind of music, there's no question that the bulk of the battle was fought with the arranging and with the programming. This is basically deciding how to express your composition. What instruments are you going to use to play that note? How is that particular harmonic concept going to be expressed? How is that rhythmic concept going to be expressed? Many of the composers of the day would send their music to the programming team, who would then input it into the game, as was the case in Falcom. Now, Yuzo Koshiro was a rare case of someone that combined a generational musical ability and understanding with a deep, deep grasp of programming. And while this is absolutely my own speculation, I suspect that this enabled him to express some of these extraordinary, syncopated, beautiful, captivating rhythms in his music in a way that a composer and a non-musical programmer working together just might not have been able to do in the same way. Weirdly, as a little aside, I noticed that in this track Pressure Road, there's a little sound in it that is identical to the sound from Sonic the Hedgehog on Mega Drive when you jump on Robotnik during the boss fights. Have a listen to this. Can you hear that? I did have a look, and so far as I know, Koshiro-san had zero involvement in that game, but it's still a cool little nugget. But we have now reached a time that would prove to be pivotal in Yuzo Koshiro's career. By 1988, he had parted ways with Falcom and began working full-time as a freelance composer. And perhaps even more critically, NEC had released its next revision of the PC-88 line, the 8801 FA and MA models, and they had now fully integrated the Yamaha 2608 sound chip as standard. The YM2608 was a powerhouse FM synthesizer. It doubled the number of FM channels to 6, still with 4 operators apiece. The chip also included 3 PSG channels, which meant that it essentially had the YM2149 from the early PC-8801 built into it. But what really made this chip an absolute beast was the addition of a PCM block for percussion. PCM stands for Pulse Code Manipulation, a way of digitally representing analog sounds. In plain English, it could play back short recordings of actual sounds known as samples, rather than having to synthesize electrical tones in real time. The chip even had an AD PCM channel, which could play back a custom sample, perhaps of a voice or even an extra bit of percussion. And it was all played back in beautiful stereo. This chip would truly prove to be instrumental, pardon the pun, in Koshiro-san's process, as he would go on to use it to compose and arrange music for games and systems well into the 90s. And it was from this point that he truly went pedal to the metal, and honestly, in my opinion, began to express some of the greatest video game music in history. Are you ready? Let's go. It immediately became clear that something special was happening when first booting up The Scheme on a PC-88 that had the YM2608 installed. Instantly, it's like getting your face splashed with ice-cold water. This title theme has everything. Beautiful, rich, varied FM instrument sounds. It almost takes us on an adventure as it changes its feel, and it has a boatload of Koshiro-san's trademark mastery of rhythm and syncopation. Just beautiful. I mean, listen to this ending here. We take a line that simple for granted, but that beautiful syncopation, the changing speed of it, the rhythm, expressing that in code would have been unbelievably complicated to do. But the reason we are here enjoying it, being moved by it, is because Yuzo Koshiro did the work, spent the time. And it is clear from the off that we are dealing with music that is simply a cut above. Interestingly, if we select the normal version, we revert back to the YM2203, with only 6 channels total. It still sounds absolutely phenomenal, but the additional horsepower on board the more modern chip, including that beautiful stereo sound, really was something very, very special and increased the emotional impact of the music. Koshiro-san recently celebrated the music for this game on Twitter, where he shared a direct feed audio clip from the PC-88 with that 2608 on board. Simply exquisite. My goodness me, just listening to this, thinking about the work that went into it, absolutely amazing. And I do just have to give a massive shout out to Basement Brothers. It's an amazing YouTube channel that does incredibly high effort videos, and they've gone to the trouble of acquiring original PC-88 hardware, original PC-88 games, and have done some amazing deep dives in those games. So absolutely, if you're interested in these, go check out that channel, subscribe, watch the videos, and I can't thank them enough for that, because it gave me insight into the games, and obviously some of the footage I've used here is from that channel. Absolutely go and show them some support, as it's a fantastic resource. But from here, he would go back and work on 3 games that were using PSG synthesis once again. The first one of this trio was the return of Ishtar on MSX2. Again, even though this system did have the optional FM pack, the music for this game focused on the PSG synthesis that all of the systems had access to as standard. Now, so far as I've been able to discover, the music for this game was actually created by Hideo Nagata and Naoki Hori, one of the founders of M2 actually, I believe, with Yuzo Koshiro being primarily responsible for the sound driver. But I will concede it was very, very difficult for me to track down any information about this, so if anyone has any more insight, please comment down below. We won't dive into this too deeply, but it is indicative of just how capable he was as a programmer. I must say, those PSG patches in this version of the game do sound rather lovely. We arrive, once again, on the Sharp X1 with the Japanese RPG, The Curse of Mars. Due to the limited capabilities of the X1 and the 2149, Koshiro-san still had only those 3 channels of PSG to work with. Honestly, I was not ready for just what he was able to achieve with this game, and to my shock, he just went ahead and created one of the greatest PSG soundtracks of all time. Take a listen. Am I overstating it if I say this piece really does have it all? We are immediately tapping our foot to his beautiful rhythms, but what I was not ready for was just how wonderful and impactful and musical the envelopes were for this soundtrack. This is a perfect opportunity to just once again go over what envelopes were and what Koshiro-san and his contemporaries were having to do in order to achieve the level of richness and vibrancy that we were lucky enough to experience. The principle of envelopes is the same as it was with the FM synthesis that we discussed earlier, but there's one key difference. This chip only had a single universal envelope rather than per channel or per operator. Put simply, an envelope controls the volume of that tone over time. The square wave itself doesn't change shape, but the envelope shapes how loud or softly that waveform plays back. That simple control can completely change the emotional character of that simple wave. And Koshiro-san designed different envelope curves, and as the music played, he was constantly deciding which shape to use and which channels to run through it. That delicate control is a huge part of why it sounds so good. Now, it's nuanced, it's complex, but when you give a true master and professional a tool like this, they will spend the time doing the work to wring it for everything it's worth, and we get this. And as exquisite as that is, another thing that truly blew my mind to pieces with this soundtrack was hearing that beautiful, delicate vibrato. And that's when the pitch of a note moves up and down very quickly, giving you that luscious, expressive, wobbly sound. Now, I was confused as I realized that there were some other PSG games that had vibrato, but I know that this chip doesn't have a low frequency oscillator, which is typically how vibrato was achieved back in the day. So how the hell was he generating this effect? I can't be certain, but as best as I can tell, what he did was design a custom vibrato function in his sound driver, which would tell, I guess, the CPU to tweak the pitch register of the PSG channel every few milliseconds. So by default, the pitch of the channel would be set at 440 Hz, but the CPU would rewrite it to 442 Hz, then to 438 Hz, back to 440 Hz, 442, etc., multiple times within a fraction of a second, and it would create that vibrato effect. I'm glad that I'm writing this episode and not speaking off the cuff, because as I was discovering this, I was quite literally left speechless. This is truly what we mean when we say that technical limitations produce the most extraordinary creativity and ingenuity imaginable. I mean, Yuzo Koshiro, goddamn son. Having destroyed the PSG synthesis game for the time being, he zoomed back to the cutting-edge PC-88 sound hardware with Wanderers from Super Scheme. Another one of those Japanese games whose title just sounds so freaking wonderful in English. Again, this one shipped with support for both the YM2203 and the more modern 2608 chip, giving us an exquisite comparison point. I mean, God, just listen to that. I don't even know what to say. It's like honey for your ears, family. There was one final PSG soundtrack created by our man in the 1980s, and it was once again for the Sharp X1. This is another absolutely beautiful piece of work, and while not necessarily as technically profound as The Curse of Mars, this is one where his quality as a composer and arranger really shines through. Take the track Town of Barents. Clearly, Koshiro-san was taking his inspiration from Baroque music, and in particular, I suspect maybe the violin concertos of Bach. Take a listen to this. That harmony is simply exquisite. The layers that he created with this one are just beautiful. We can also hear his coding prowess going full pelt with this beautiful tempo change. Remember, gradually reducing the tempo and having it actually sound beautiful and expressive and musical rather than garbled was an exercise in precision. Manually inputting new tempo values, maybe even more than one per note. Just awesome. He really went ham with Volcano of Aruda and dropped a disgraceful 5/4 groove right out of nowhere. I mean, Mountain of Patron is a magnificent example of squeezing blood out of a stone. You can hear the craft at work, as Koshiro-san designed a bass instrument that has that vaguely percussive quality, and then he wrote a bass line that, when played by that instrument, conveys the harmony and the beat. This is what it means to be a master arranger. You maximize the tools that you have at your disposal to create the emotional experience that you want in the listener, or the gamer. Yuzo Koshiro plays that YM2149 like a great saxophonist plays their saxophone. Utilizing all the expressive qualities of his instrument. I mean, just listen to this and consider the work that he had to do to express this music. But it was at this point that the technology available would take a generational leap forward, as the next system he would release for was the Sharp X68000. This system was an absolute gaming beast. Released in 1987, it featured the legendary Motorola 68000 CPU, clocking in at a whopping 10 megahertz. It had 1 megabyte of RAM as standard, but it could be upgraded to an astronomical 12 megabytes. Its graphics hardware supported standard gaming resolutions of 512 by 512 and 768 by 512 with either 16 or 256 colors from a palette of over 65,000. It had support for up to 128 sprites and supported smooth background scrolling. It was getting serious, family. This was marketed as the arcade at home, and with specs like this, you know that Sharp were not messing around. It was astronomically expensive, but for the time, it was simply a juggernaut of home gaming. And this was also true when it came to the music hardware. It housed the Yamaha YM2151, which featured 8 FM channels, each having 4 operators once again, along with the OKI ADPCM channel to play back custom samples. And all of this was once again outputted in beautiful stereo. Throughout the 80s, Yuzo Koshiro would work on one game for the X68000, but he would make sure it was one to remember. Bosconian was a neat arcade game when it originally released in 1981. At the time, it featured extremely basic audio with hardly any music and only a few blops and blips. But when it was re-released on X68000, Yuzo Koshiro and sound team JDK were given free rein to create an entirely new soundtrack utilizing this cutting-edge audio technology, and god damn. What is there to say? It's just awesome, epic mastery of FM synthesis. This release on X68000 is rightly viewed as the definitive version, and this epic music is the reason why. And it's emblematic of how great music can elevate a fairly simple game into a profound artistic and emotional experience. By this point, Koshiro-san's music creation workflow had become so efficient and refined on the PC-8801 that it was on this setup that he composed and arranged the music for Bosconian on the X68000. And this is a trend that would continue well into the next decade, and it was thus for the final game that he would create the music for this decade. And whilst, as we've seen and hopefully enjoyed, his output for the PC-88 platform was pivotal and, let's just keep it real, amazing. It was with this next game and this next system that the legend truly was born. For many of us that grew up in the 1990s, Yuzo Koshiro and Sega will be forever bound and be forever one. Until this point, pretty much every system that we have looked at existed almost exclusively in Japan. But that all changed with the Sega Mega Drive. Known as the Genesis in North America, it launched in Japan in 1988 and would go on to become one of the greatest consoles of all time. Inside, it also housed a Motorola 68000 CPU, had dedicated hardware for sprites and smooth background scrolling, and crucially, it came with some fascinating sound hardware. At its heart was the Yamaha YM2612, which offered 6 channels of FM synthesis, with one of those channels being able to play back custom PCM samples. On top of that, the system also included a programmable sound generator, functionally the same as the Texas Instruments SN76489 from the Sega Master System. This chip had 3 channels of PSG synthesis, giving the Mega Drive a potential of 9 voice polyphony. But when in the hands of a master, the creative limits of this console's sound hardware just did not exist. And when such a master set their sights on Sega's 16-bit powerhouse, nothing would ever be the same again. You know that when the composer's name is on the title screen of a game, you are about to experience something special, and it was thus. For us 90s Sega kids, the Revenge of Shinobi was one of our staples. Legendarily difficult, but gosh darn, what a game. Top tier action, great controls, beautiful art design, but above all else, extraordinary music. I mean, just listen to that bass line. Jesus. And the first thing that really strikes me about this music, of course having made our way here through the rest of this catalogue, is that it really feels like both he and his music were beginning to mature. So much of his output till now was very, very full on, kind of firing on all cylinders, showing us what he was capable of. Whereas here, I'm almost feeling him sit back and groove properly for the first time. He could really, really get it going when he needed to, and he did. And if there was another iconic track from this game, it had to be Chinatown. Again, to me, this really just feels like an evolution, and it feels like a step change in what he was trying to express with his music, and I am absolutely here for it. And this really was the first game that gave Yuzo Koshiro's music worldwide notoriety, and what a game for people to have their first experience of his music with. And to really dig in and appreciate what tools the YM2612 and the Mega Drive offered, and what Yuzo Koshiro created with them, we will once again turn to Carpathia 808 and their incredible oscilloscope breakdown of this mind-blowing track. To start with, we can hear and we can see that one of the FM channels is being used to play back PCM drum samples. It's beautiful because you can hear that only one percussive hit is being triggered at any one given moment, but because of how Koshiro-san is doing so, it feels so full and vibrant. And we've got that PSG channel coming in with a little bit of noise for seasoning. And check out that PCM waveform as well. More jagged, more imperfect due to it being a heavily compressed recording of an actual sound, rather than a flawlessly generated electrical signal. Now we're going to go ahead and add in that disgraceful FM bass line. Again, noting the waveform. We now know why it looks the way it does, and we can now fully appreciate its delicate beauty as a result. Add in those delicious FM synth parts. And Yuzo Koshiro is deploying total mastery of his craft. Insane groove expressed by wringing every drop of emotion out of this exquisite sound chip. You can literally see the code. You can see the hours and hours of work being expressed in those waveforms. This is what it means to have understanding and to perceive artistic beauty. And it is art, plain and simple. So many different sounds, so many different emotions. It is just so beautiful. even better, you might have just noticed that 2 of the PSG channels aren't even being used. They're being reserved for sound effects in the game so that they can be played without taking away one of the music tracks. It's just exquisite design. And there's no doubt that my own nostalgia for this game and this console and this incoming era of gaming is, clouding my judgment. It is my judgment after all, but I don't really care. This was game-changing, again, no pun intended. And this was Yuzo Koshiro at the height of his power, entering into an era of incomparable mastery, not only over the technology, but over his musicality, over his creative process, over his art. And what a way to close out some extraordinary years of music, and to lead us on into the next decade that would, for many of us, be definitive in our lives. Gaining even the most rudimentary sense of what Koshiro-san and his contemporaries were having to do in order to realize their music will affect how it makes us feel when we experience it. Understanding the extraordinary technical limitations of the day, and therefore the lengths these trailblazers were having to go to in order to overcome them, will impact how we feel when that music starts a pumping. And every time I sit back and jam out to the music of this era, whether I'm playing one of the games or not, I'm eternally grateful that so many people put that insane amount of work in so that I could do just that. And you want to know what the best part is? We're just getting started. Well, if you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching. You're clearly also huge fans of Yuzo Koshiro and this extraordinary music. Now, when I set out to make this video, I knew it would be a lot of work, but my goodness me, I didn't realize it would be this much work. But I've had such an incredible time going back through this back catalogue, listening to the music, checking out some of the games, really just expressing how the music made me feel when I heard it. I have to thank a million times over the following YouTube channels, because without their work and without their outputs, I wouldn't have been able to make this video in the way that I did. So thank you to all of them. All the channels will be linked in the description, so definitely go check them out and show them some love as well if you are so inclined. Now, I have already nominally started working on the next episode. I haven't yet decided whether or not it's going to be all of the 90s or sort of we're going to do the 90s in 2 episodes. The reason for that is that I would love to do the 90s in one go, but I think it will be more than double the amount of games that we covered in this episode, and that is quite a daunting prospect. There are a number of other things that I would like to do for the next episode. I'm going to capture as much of the actual gameplay footage myself as I can. I'm going to spend more time actually talking about the games as well, rather than solely focusing on the music. One of the reasons for that is that I am a kind of a 90s kid. I'm very nostalgic for this period of gaming, and I get to cover the Master System, Mega Drive, Saturn, Dreamcast, talk about the technology, etc., which I'm really excited to do. I would just like to ask if there's anything that you would like to see in a next episode, perhaps something that I could do differently, or some more insights, or anything. Like, for example, I think I'd like to capture more of my live reaction to when I hear the music for the first time, because that for me is quite important as well, for posterity and also for other people to see if they want to see that as well. So I'm considering potentially streaming some of the gameplay for the games for the 90s. If anyone would be interested in that, just let me know in the comments. Otherwise, yeah, any other ideas you've got or things you'd like to see in a video on the games that Yuzo Koshiro created music for in the 90s, I'd be really interested to hear that. Obviously, it goes without saying, but please comment down below with any insights you've had, any emotional reactions to the video. I know that there are going to be things that I've missed out, or whatever, that you'll be more than willing to let me know about, so thank you for doing that in advance. And I'm just excited to have conversations in the comments, just to discuss, and like I said in the intro, ultimately celebrate what is a breathtaking creative legacy. It really is like mind-blowing already how amazing this music is, and just how much variety and how rich Koshiro-san's output was throughout the 80s, and I'm so psyched to jump into the 90s and check out those games as well. One little caveat is that this honestly has taken me so much time, and the next video is going to be an order of magnitude more. If you didn't like this and you're not interested in seeing another episode, just let me know, because I ultimately want to just make videos that you enjoy watching and that you are moved by and that you just find, just a nice way to spend some of your valuable time. So if you'd rather I do something else, just let me know about that as well, because I've got lots of video ideas, things I'd like to do, but I'm only a one-man band, obviously, so it just takes time. So whatever your feelings, please just let me know in the comments. Again, thank you very, very much for watching. I really just hope that you enjoyed it and that it was, again, worthy of the great man. If you did enjoy it, please consider clicking a like, because it just helps the channel out and that it was worth doing this and not something else. Also, if you are interested in seeing the succeeding episodes to this series, i.e. the games of Yuzo Koshiro Part 2, the 90s, like the golden decade, click subscribe, because I've already started working on it, but it will take a bit of time. Just bear that in mind. But yeah, thank you very much. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I hope that I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.